Good afternoon to you, and welcome to this series, I guess, of webinars from Meirc Training and Consulting. Today, as the title in front of you shows, is called Interviewing the Misunderstood Task. I'm kind of hoping that all of you, or I'm guessing that all of you, deal with interviewing somehow, and that's why you are with me today. Welcome. My name is Ibrahim Al-Yafi. I'm a senior consultant with Meirc Training and Consulting. I've been with Meirc for the last 4 years, and I am a human resources specialist. Let me start, first of all, by giving you a bit of my background. This is me, looking sideways, smiling. As the slide in front of you shows, I'm a US graduate with a bachelor's degree in engineering management from the University of Missouri-Rolla, and I pursued that. After that, I pursued a master's in business administration with the Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. I started out in the field of education for a couple of years, and then I moved into the area of training and development, and that was my first, if you will, jump into the world of human resources development. I started moving jobs and moving countries, and as you see in front of you, I have worked in 7 different countries until finally I led the human resources function in a number of organizations. I've got over now 23 years of experience in the field. With Meirc, my areas of expertise focus mainly on human resources and training, but being a human resources professional, looking into the area of leadership, cultural change, sales development, and interpersonal skills comes in a way with the package. But my passion, obviously, with human resources. All right, enough about me, and let's talk about the subject that you guys are here for, which is interviewing. What I'd like to do as a start off, I'd like to run a survey with you. And I'm going to switch the survey now. I have a question for you. The question that you hear in interviews that says, why do you want to join our organization? My question to you is this a good interviewing question? If the answer is yes, please click yes. If the answer is no, please click no. We have about 15 seconds to do this. Okay, very good. We're getting very close. Anybody else would like to vote? Very good. All right, don't think too much about it. Just a simple yes or no. All right, we're going to give you 5 more seconds. All right, still some people hesitant to vote. All right, let's end the voting. Very good. I'm going to show the details. Here you go. So about 41% of you thought that what question was, yes, a good question in interviews, and about 17% said no. I'm actually glad that 17% said no, because yeah, unfortunately, this is not a very good question. It's a very popular question, but it's not really a very good question. The reason it's not a very good question is the answer. Today, if you actually go on Google and you type that question into the Google search engine, you're gonna get a perfect answer. And as you probably know, all of these young candidates now that are coming to us, everybody is web enabled and they've got all the experience, browsing the web. So they can easily find a good answer and they can wow you with a very good answer. So if that's the case, what should we do? I mean, take a look at the next slide. Just type the word interviewing questions or interview questions into Google and look at how many hits you. This was done, believe it or not, a few years back. It wasn't done recently. And in 23 seconds, as you see there, you get about 65 million to 65 million hits. And if you open any one of those interesting websites, not only do they provide you with the typical questions that you get in a job interview, they provide you with a wonderful answer. So that will, so you will go into the interview and you'll be able to give this great, well-fabricated answer to impress the interviewer. And when the interviewer hears you with all that confidence and the perfect answer, he has no choice but to say yes. So we have to actually take a step further and come up with a methodology where the employee has to impress us with something that we need on the job. Very good. So this is what we're going to talk about in this webinar in the next 30 minutes. Let me start first of all by talking about what is the definition of an interview. Well, very simply, an interview is a conversation between a couple of people to obtain information about the interviewee. It's definitely a question that is, or a meeting between these two people to share information for either party to make a decision whether they want to join the other party in a contract that will last for probably a number of years. Notice the comment that I have at the bottom of that slide. An interview is not a test. The common understanding of interview, this is a place where I'm going to test the candidate and find out whether he's good or not. No, it's not. It's actually a meeting for you to obtain information about the candidate and decide whether that candidate is suitable for the job or not. You're not testing the candidate, you're just learning about the candidate. And that is a major attitude difference, if you will, between going into the interview wanting to catch the candidate or get the candidate, or are you trying to get to know the candidate to try to create a match or find if there's a match, if there's chemistry, if there's a click between the candidate and the company that he is applying for. All right, to summarize some of the bad habits interviewers have, well, and we call them bad interviewers, and this is what they do. Listen to this. Point number one, judge a candidate during the interview. Well, what's wrong with that? This is what I thought. I'm here to actually decide whether the candidate is a good candidate for me or not. Why? What's wrong about judging the candidate during the interview? Because once you actually make that judgment, you have made a psychological decision that you either want this person or don't want this person, and you're not going to listen to that person anymore. If you do, if you make that decision or psychological decision, then any other information that might be pertinent and very important to the decision-making process of hiring or not hiring that candidate, you have basically canceled that information. So if you don't like the candidate and you say, you know what, he's not worth it, he might be the perfect candidate in the wrong attire because he's nervous, he didn't express himself well, and unfortunately you crossed out that candidate because you decided to make a quick judgment. So judging the candidate during interview is a big no-no. The other one is relying on something called the gut feeling. Wow, I mean, a lot of the people, a lot of the managers tell you this is the best way. And research says that when you make a decision, a managerial decision, everybody feel that the gut feeling is a very important way, if you will, of making a decision. Well, you're dealing with candidates here and you want to portray an image of fairness and integrity, if you will, with dealing with candidates. And that's why we say, please don't depend on gut feelings, depend on collecting facts. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Tricky questions do make them nervous, and that's the last thing that you want, because again, you're there to make sure that people are relaxed and you want to get the information. Remember, it's a information collection session. It is not a session to trick the candidate or make them feel uncomfortable or any of that wonderful crazy ideas, in my opinion, to get the candidate. The next item there, it says to try to analyze the candidate during an interview. Well, I think this one is very simple. Obviously, if your mind is engaged in thinking, in analyzing the candidate, you're not listening to the candidate, you're listening to yourself. And a lot of good information are coming in, probably coming in, and you're not listening at all. Next one, my favorite. They try to trip the candidate with trick or tough questions. Yes, Russia is telling, hearing and not listening. Absolutely, yes. You're concentrating on something else instead of listening to the candidate, and you're just there without focusing on what the candidate says. So let me talk about this, trying to trip the candidate with trick and tough questions. The favorite technique for a lot of managers when they are trying to ask interview a candidate is to try to ask them these trick tough questions, because they're thinking, you know what, this job requires a lot of pressure. If this guy cannot prove himself during this interview, if he cannot handle the pressure that we give him during the interview, he is not worth it. Well, you know what? If the candidate handles himself, during or handles pressure during the interview, he has proven to be a good interviewer. He did not prove to be a good candidate for the job. I hope you see the difference between the two. Absolutely. Thinking that using targeted selection techniques is absolutely fair. Yeah, that's the way we're gonna go. Very good. I'm glad that people are agreeing with me. On the other hand, good interviewers, if you will, well, shelf their personal tastes and preferences. It doesn't matter what I like. It doesn't matter what I prefer. I'm here about the candidate. I'm here to collect information. I'm here to find the match, not between me and the candidate, but the match between the candidate and the organization. So my personal tastes, my personal preferences are completely irrelevant here. I have to make sure that I shelf these tastes and preferences and give them no factor whatsoever in my evaluation later on. And good candidates, the next point, they take a large amount of notes during the interview. Well, why is that? Well, if you remember, we said this is a data collection session about the candidate. And that if that's the case, we better collect those information. And what better way than to take a large amount of notes? Think about it. How many of you actually spend time to take notes about every single piece of information the candidate has shared with you? Very few people do that. Think of your managers. Are they actually collecting good amount of information, or are they just getting an impression of the candidate during those meetings? A recorder is a possibility. I like that idea, but you need to be careful. A recorder sometimes may be intrusive. A lot of people may find the recorder a bit offensive, especially if you are you're a gentleman. So if a lady is actually in the meeting, she wouldn't appreciate exactly she wouldn't appreciate somebody recording her without permission. It might be a legal issue. Yes. It might be a legal issue in some countries as well. So if you're going to use a recorder, you need to get permission from the candidate. Now, the problem with that as well, if you do use a recorder and you do get the permission of the candidate, some of the candidates might find that a way to create pressure on them. Think about yourself, put yourself in their shoes. You're being recorded. Well, what are you going to do with that recording? Is that going to go to reach my current employer? So yeah, it can be dangerous. My favorite is definitely to take notes. And if you're not the kind of person who can take notes quickly, well, you know what? Invite somebody who can do that for you. And if you're doing a panel interview, one person can ask the questions while the other can take the notes, and they can reverse roles as the other person takes the turn in asking the questions. The next point that I think good interviewers do is they follow an interview questions guide. And what I mean by that is that the questions that get asked for one candidate should be the same questions that asked to the next candidate. You cannot make up questions depending on the candidates. Everybody should be asked fairly. To make that point, or to bring that point home, if you will, let me compare that with if your son and my son go to the same school. Would you accept that your son take a different math test than the one that my son takes? You would say absolutely no. This is unfair. How are you going to compare them? Exactly the same. When you are interviewing for a certain job, the same general questions should be asked to all candidates. I realize that they should be specific questions that has to be customized, but they should be within exactly. They should be within the same topic. You cannot ask a candidate one topic and ignore the topic of another person. I just received the first question, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning. If you don't mind, please type in your questions as we go along with this webinar, and I will get to them towards the end. I will answer them one by one. All right, very good. And a good interviewer, of course, realizes that you're coming to an interview, and in an interview, it's natural, it's normal to be nervous. So they allow the person they calm the person down instead of putting more pressure on the individual. Absolutely. Somebody that said, the questions should match the job profile and the competence required per job. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Look at this reliability of interviews, and that comment that came from Ala actually introduced my next slide. Take a look at this. I've taken three points. This reliability of interviews chart in front of you had a lot more components, but I wanted to reduce it to these three to highlight the point and the importance of conducting competency-based interviews, right? Look at this, the standard interview by a single interviewer that's happening all over the world, and especially in the Middle East. Look at the reliability of this interview. It's less than 10%. And we wonder why we're having such a hard time choosing the right people. And of course, why we lose people so much. While if we introduce and train people on competency-based interviews, look at this. By just introducing competency-based interviews, a single interviewer can increase the reliability and effectiveness of interview all the way up to 56%. If you conduct a competency-based interview by multiple interviewers, you're close to 90%. Won't you be happy with 90% effectiveness and reliability rate in these interviews? I would. So if you're saying that competency-based interviews are the best style of interviews, the Rolls Royce of interviews, how are these conducted? Well, they are conducted based on a number of principles. The main principles are there in front of you in this slide. The number one principle is that these interviews have to focus on past behavior, not futuristic behavior. If you want to predict future behavior, the person must have done this behavior in the past. We don't want to get any of these theoretical responses. What would you do if you were placed in that position? I'll talk more about this a little later on, a few more minutes or later in the webinar. Again, the politically correct answers. Remember the question I asked you? Why do you want to join our organization? Well, what do you expect? The answer for this question is pretty standard because you have the most wonderful organization in the world. I've heard so much about you. You are the best place where my career can develop, blah, blah, blah. I mean, those are very typical politically correct answer, 100%. So that's why we don't want this. We want to find out whether the candidate is actually suitable for this job or not. And that can only happen by focusing on past behavior. Did the person achieve this in the past or not? And the last principle is when we ask, we cannot open the door for all the questions in the world, in all areas of the world. We have limited time in these interviews, so we need to ensure that we focus on specific areas. Next, so what are the strengths of competency-based interviews? Well, accurate selection, lower turnover, transparency, cost effectiveness, and professionalism are the outcomes of conducting competency-based interviews. The way you do competency-based interviews, if you do it correctly, as you've seen in the chart before, to about 90%. And if your reliability is at about 90%, the automatic thing that's going to happen is that people are going to be correctly selected into that position. And therefore, hopefully, they will not leave you that easily because they were properly matched into the job. The transparency that comes with that type of interviews, and of course, get the right person correctly from the first time, you save a lot of the costs that come with recruitment. And you all know how expensive recruitment is. And it's a very professional way because it's very fair way of asking questions and conducting interviews. A typical structure or interview is no, rocket science. It starts with an introduction where you introduce yourself, why you here, what's the purpose of this interview, how is the interview going to be conducted, what are the ground rules that you're going to follow for the next hour, an hour and a half, depending on the period that you have allowed for this interview. Start always with an opening statement, something to put the candidate at ease, not to make that candidate, nervous. Don't jump right into asking, very specific, very technical questions. Get them relaxed and start talking. Ensure that they do the majority of the talking. Don't share a lot of the information. You should be spending 20% of the time talking while they spend 80% of the time talking and you listening to them. After that, When you spend a couple of minutes here and a couple of minutes on the first, section, a couple of minutes on the next section, then you jump into the hardcore questions that focus on past behaviors related to the job. And this is where you need to spend most of your time and getting that person to talk. And finally, of course, once you collect that information, you do the proper closing. When you do the closing, whatever you do, please do not give your opinion about how well that person has done on the interview. Just thank that candidate for providing and being, upfront with all the information, and tell him that where you're gonna get back to them. But when they try to pressure you to get you to give them an opinion about how well they've done, please don't offer that to them, because it will be taken as a hint by them that whether you have accepted them or not accepted them. All right. So what is the key success factor in any of these interviews? Well, of course, the questions. And there are 4 types of questions that I am going to talk to you about. There are the knowledge questions, where you check the knowledge of the candidate. There are the competency-based questions, the star of the questions, and then we have the probes. And if you notice on the right-hand side there, the separated piece, the questions that we are avoiding altogether. Here's an example: a hypothetical question, a not allowed question. For example, you and another coworker are jointly responsible for completing an assignment. Your coworker is not doing his or her share of the work. What would you do? How would you behave? If you really think about that question, you would think, wow, this is a very strong, detailed question. Well, it's not, because it really, if you look at the tenses used in this one, it's asking about what are you going to do in the future? Well, is there any guarantee that he will actually answer this? I mean, if he answered this, that he will do these? No. The best way is to actually take that question and turn it into the past tense. Have you been in a situation where you and a coworker, right, shared a disagreement, or well, he did not do, or did not do, she did not do her part of the work? What did you do? How did you handle this in the past? If he's done it or she's done it before, then you know they've got the experience. If they haven't done it before, well, they haven't done it before. Maybe they've seen other people have done it before, but that doesn't mean they've got the experience. And what we're interested in is their experience and their knowledge about this. The other kind of disallowed questions are the multiple questions, where you shoot 3 or 4 questions together, right, to the candidate. The reason, of course, is you're confusing the candidate. I mean, this is a trick usually journalists use with politicians when they ask questions, because they only have a time for a question, so they bulk a number of questions into one. Well, you're not interviewing a politician, you're interviewing a candidate, and you have plenty of time, and you're the only one who's asking questions. So one question at a time. The questions about the multiple choice questions. Do you prefer to work in sales or marketing or advertising? Well, guess what? If the job is in sales, he's going to say, I'm interested in sales. You are indirectly spoon feeding the candidate to what to answer. And then, of course, you've got the academic questions, where those are politically correct answers, or the kind of questions such as, why do you wish to join our organization, as we said in the beginning, or where do you see yourself 3 to 5 years? Well, I don't know. I mean, you have those dreams in the future, but my question is, how does this relate to whether this person is actually capable of doing the job or not? A lot of the people, when I ask that question, tell me, well, I want to see if that person is ambitious or not, if he's interested in the job or not. My answer to that, well, the candidate is right there in front of you. If he wasn't interested in the job, he wouldn't be in the interview. Go for questions that focus on the candidate's ability to do the job, and focus on his experience and the fact that he's done the job in the past. That's the only guarantee that you've got, or at least the only partial guarantee that you've got, that he can repeat the behavior in the future. The probing questions, those are the favorite of mine, and they're part actually of the competency-based questions. The probing questions means that is just that. They are questions used to give you details, a lot of details about what's going on and in a certain area, how do you do a certain thing, and requires a lot of explanation, and that's what you want. An example of that, here are three examples actually in front of you on the slide. It says, please describe the process that you followed to handle the complaints. Notice it's in the past tense, it's open-ended, and if you notice, it's not really a question, it's asking him to explain something. So he has to give you a lot of details. Example number 2, please explain 3 improvements you made in your team. He cannot answer that in 1 or 2 words. He has to elaborate. Please detail why the system you used was better than the previous one. Again, same thing. And that's exactly what you're looking for. A lot of information that comes your way. All right, an example now. I promised you to give you an example of a competency-based question, and that is the technique I'm going to talk to you about. You may have heard about it before, but it's good to recap it and talk about it again. It's called the STAR technique, and the STAR, of course, is an acronym for 4 different words. You start with the following, with understanding the situation. So you ask the person to tell you what is the situation that you were in when you were trying to handle a certain case. So you get the facts, get this total story, the background of the story. So when you tell a person, describe a time when you had a conflict and with a colleague, and what did you do in that situation. So he has to start. You have to ensure that you understand what was the situation, what was the conflict about, who was involved in the conflict. It's the background of the story, right? The stage. Never make it. Yes, absolutely. The second one, T, task. Okay, so what was the task that was intended, right? What were you trying to achieve during that situation? And he has to tell you and start describing that. Great, thank you for telling me this. Now, so what was the action that you have taken, right? What is the decision? What is the report that you've written? Tell me about the specific action that you've done. And finally, how do you know that you have achieved the result? Right? So you need to confirm that he achieved the results. If you follow the 4 steps between the situation, the task, the action, and the result, you've got the complete picture, and you know whether that person has done has got the experience in the past, and there's no way on earth he can lie. And if he can lie on a question like this, you know what? You need to hire that guy because he's pretty good. So what I want to do now is I want to show you a video clip that shows you the STAR technique in action. It's about a 2-minute video clip, but it will give you a pretty good idea about how it's done. Here we go.
James, could you please provide us with an example of a difficult situation or problem that you faced and how you went about resolving it and what the outcome was?
Well, the first one that comes to mind was a situation at university where I was coordinating a group assignment where we had to run a mock company and hand in all the paperwork and financials for the end of the financial year.
So what did you find difficult here?
Well, since I was the group coordinator, there was a lot riding on me to make it as good as it could possibly be. But there was one person who never showed up to the meetings or contributed to the assignment in any way.
So what did you do?
Well, the group and I had a meeting to decide how we should go forward with that, and it was decided that I would have a meeting with the person concerned and see what could be done about it. I had the meeting, and they were at once very apologetic for not coming along, but at the same time they explained that they had an awful lot of family issues going on at home, and I was sorry for them, but at the same time I had to be conscious that it wasn't fair to the rest of the group.
I can see that would have been a difficult situation for you. What did you do next?
Well, I thought long and hard about it. It was a tricky situation, but I eventually decided to have a meeting with that person and the course lecturer.
And then what happened?
Well, the course lecturer was very understanding. She gave the person an exemption from the assignment and said that they could get the marks back at a later date, which allowed us to reallocate all the different bits and pieces in the assignment out to all the other members of the group. And therefore, we managed to complete everything on time and get everything done. And we did really well for the assignment. We actually got a high distinction.
Great.
All right. So you've seen the STAR action in technique. Of course, I have to admit that the lady who did the interviewing made a mistake, because we said one of the things that are not allowed is to actually have multiple questions. But I guess because it's a video, we'll we'll let that one pass. She asked a number of questions at the beginning. But the thing that I want you to focus on, did you notice how they actually start probing and probing and probing some more until they finally understood the situation, the task, the action that James has taken, and finally, what was the end result of this? If based on this, you can tell that this individual has a lot of initiative, he's got leadership qualities, good communication skills, handling conflict. You can actually make a lot of good judgments based on collecting of that information, and that is the beauty of competency-based questions, and in particular, the use of the STAR technique. I guess we're coming to the end of the half hour now, and I think what I'd like to do is to stop talking and try to respond to any questions that you might have about the STAR technique or any other questions in interviews. And I'm hoping that I made the case that the best and most effective, if you will, way to ask questions and conduct interviews should be competency-based, and should be targeted towards the past behaviors. And it's about collecting information and doing the matching between the individual and the job, and not about testing the individual, scaring the individual, or proving a point, if you will, against that individual. That's not what we're there for. We're there to ensure that we choose the right candidate for the right job. Thank you very much. I want to open now the session for questions and answers. I think there are a couple of questions that I've seen before, which I'll try to scroll up to and answer them. Let's see here. Right. Do the tricky questions not give an idea about the ability of the candidate to handle stressful situations? No, I mean, that was the point I was making. If you remember, I think the person who asked the question is Mr. Muhammad Omer. If you remember, I told you when you pressurize the candidate, he either proves he can handle himself during the interview, or not handle himself during interview. Being pressured during interview only tests his ability to interview well. It doesn't test his ability to do well on the job. My favorite example that was shared to me by one of our participants is about an individual who was recruited from Egypt for a manufacturing company. The position was to handle a furnace. A furnace was a very important aspect, apparently, of the manufacturing process in that company. And the person was asked these questions. He was put under a lot of pressure, and he was asking these futuristic questions, and he answered everything correctly. They offered him the job, brought him to this company was in Saudi Arabia, flew him to Saudi Arabia, did the orientation, and told them, here's the furnace, go in and do your job. That guy turned yellow. Why did he turn yellow? What's going on? He said, this is the first time in my life I'm going to be inside the furnace. But you said you knew this, and you knew this, and you knew that. And he said, yeah, but I've never been inside. I watched the people. I was in quality control. I watched the people, but I never knew about handling those the actual instruments that are required to be handled in the furnace. He was pressurized during the interview and did extremely well, but when he was actually put on the job, it was completely different. Let's see, trying to scroll down these questions. Should the interview be knowledge focused? No, the interview should be knowledge focused in the beginning only. If you remember, competencies are defined, or if you know about competencies are the combinations of knowledge, skills, and attitude. So you can check on the knowledge as a way to complete, if you will, your understanding of the knowledge. So you may want to start with, how would you write a job description, to know whether he knows the step, and then you have to move into a past or focused question. So have you written any job descriptions? Now that you told me how to write a job description, did you write them? What did you do? What was the situation? The whole thing about the STAR technique, to prove to you that he has actually done it. Knowing something, my favorite example I use in my courses, I tell them, if you ask today a 10-year-old child, how do you drive a car? He will tell you exactly how to drive the car, but does he know how to drive the car? Does he really know how to drive the car? Or is he able of driving a car? The answer is absolutely no. Next question is, what about the questions we should Okay, I think that question is missing something, Mr. Ala. If you don't mind resending that question, it says, "What about the question? Why should we?" Ah, yes, sorry. You were asking me about why should we take you? Yes, this is another politically correct answer, or the question that requires another political correct answer. Yeah, because you're the best company in the world. You have the best career. I've done a lot of research. The answer to this question is pretty typical. You're not going to get a piece of information that will help you determine whether this person is a good candidate for that particular job or not. Next question, scrolling down. Some companies do many than one interview meeting in different location or venue. Are you with or without this? Actually, I am with that because it will allow the company to get different views from different people on the same candidate. If you remember in the reliability chart, we talked about how we can increase the reliability. One of the ways is to use competency-based questions and use competency-based questions by a number of interviewers. So yes, different opinions will definitely help. And having the person see the different venues is a way of exposing the company. Remember, this is a two-way street. You want the person to be comfortable with the company as well. So it's a very nice way of introducing the company to the candidate as well. So yeah, by all means, I support that 100%. Next question is by Khalid, I believe. How do you test the stress threshold of candidates? A very, very interesting question, and thank you for sharing that with us. Well, ask about it. Tell him, have you been in a situation where stress was required? Have you ever been, under a firefighting situation? If the answer is yes, tell me what you have done. Go for the STAR. Go for the technique. Start for the STAR technique and start probing the individual on what he has done being under pressure. Now, and I'm glad you asked that question because you have to understand the person who needs to probe in a certain area has to be an expert in the area that you're probing in. So if you're talking about being stressful while handling, for example, a customer complaint, you need somebody who's an excellent, customer service representative who can ask these questions because he's been there. So the way to find out whether the person can handle stress or not is to ask about it and ask about it in the past. Russia is asking me a question. In a competency framework, you have behavioral that falls back on attitude, yes, and you have technical that falls back on functional skills experience. When you prepare a set of questions, which category you give the more weight? Well, competency-based questions, because they ask about the past behaviors, you want to actually the combination of both. There's a common saying that hire for attitude, train for skills. So you do want the right attitude in place, not the wrong attitude. You can have the most skillful person in the world, but with the wrong attitude, you cannot really do much with that person. A couple of months later, 3 months later, you can say he's great, but I don't want that person in the company anymore. He's ruining the team spirit, so on and so forth. I want him out of here. So when you ask your questions, focus on behaviors. Behaviors usually are an excellent indicator of attitude. So we're talking about even technical behaviors, not technical skills, right? So he should show you that he can do it, and by describing the behavior, you will also detect the attitude. All right. What about this question? Why should we? I think it's the same thing as the question before. Again, because I can do this for you. I have the best education that I've got. My experience, I think, lies beautifully with your knowledge, with your line of business. The answers to this, the answer to that is very political, and you can find a perfect answer, if you will, if you do that search that we talked about in the beginning online. Mr. Abdullah Sabah, I think, is asking, what about the interview by phone? Well, it's the next best thing. It's not really the first thing. Usually phone interviews, we recommend that they only happen at the very early stage when you're trying to determine whether this person qualifies for the job or not. In other words, does he have the right qualifications? So it's only for checking. If you do a complete competency-based interview on the phone, it's doable, but you are missing 58% content of the message. If you've heard about the distribution between the three elements that we use when we communicate. It's the words, the tone of voice, as well as the body language. And surprisingly, body language, or we transmit 58% of our message by our body language, the facial expressions, the hand movements, the body movements. You'll be missing a lot on that. I would much more prefer if you actually do a face-to-face. But sometimes, of course, I understand it's difficult, and the person is in a completely different country. You don't have the budget to bring him in because the job may not be a senior position. If you can do a Skype thing, I'd rather you do a Skype versus a phone interview. But I would always go for a face-to-face. I prefer that. Panel interviews, but I'm sorry I skipped that one. Panel interview minimizes the structured opinion about the candidate. True, but at the same time, panel interviews can be dangerous. Panel interviews, if you, sometimes you have too many people on the panel, they can get in each other's way. And a lot of the times, there's one person who's doing the most of the talking while the other person is just listening. And so there might be an issue of balance. One of the worst things that can happen during the interview, if you have members of the panel fight with each other in front of the candidates. Usually we recommend in any panel, don't have more than two people, a member from the HR team and the line manager. Right. This way, you minimize the possibility for conflicts. Panel interviews are very difficult logistically. Where are we here? There are applicants who are not good in answering interview questions, especially those who are competency-based. But if you will see how they work completely beyond standards, what do you think about it? Is there any way to find out? So I'm guessing what you're referring to here are individuals who may not be competent in a certain area, but you want to see whether they have the potential to develop in that area. Please confirm if I read that correctly. I think that question was sent by Ron. Okay, I'm going to answer the way I interpreted. Very good. Okay, thank you. Well, yes, in that case, you're going to have to go for the knowledge. You cannot go, especially from the technical competencies. If somebody does not have the competence, for example, to handle a certain machinery, and he is an engineering graduate, so you want to find out how much he knows. So yeah, you basically rate him at the very low end. And you determine his attitude from other competencies in dealing with other people, and you try to do a mix and match to see whether the person can handle or not. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm back online. My apologies. I think we had a technical problem at our end, and I couldn't get back in immediately. Can I get a confirmation from people if they can hear me or not? Okay. Okay. Now we can. Okay, terrific. Again, I apologize sincerely. It was a technical problem. I'm gonna try. I mean, we've got about 15 more minutes. I'm gonna try to go back and answer as many questions as I can. There was a let's see. We talked about the competency, if the person has the competency or not. I think there's another question that I was answering, but nobody was hearing me. Having the two types of candidates: somebody who follows the process and when they are defined and feel comfortable with them, versus the candidates who are comfortable with no processes and are able to create them. Terrific. Yes. Yeah, I mean, the answer that I was telling you, again, in both cases, it depends on the kind of job that you've got for the person. I mean, if you have a kind of job that you want an individual to be the kind of person who would follow the process and to the T, then that's the kind of thing you need to ask about. In both cases, you need to depend on the STAR technique again. Ask if you want the person to be a creative person, come up with his own processes. Ask about that. Did he do it in the past? Can he prove that he can do it in the past? How can you, and I guess the next question asks about the same thing. Can you check for the suitability of an introvert person who may be a very good employee? Naturally, to be introvert versus extrovert is not a big deal, as long as the person can do the job. I mean, you got a lot of people who are big introverts, but when it comes to communication, they are extremely good, and vice versa. So it's not about being an introvert or an extrovert. It's about the ability of the person to do the job or not do the job. I would, in all cases, go for the STAR technique. Have you been in that situation before? Have you done something about it? What was the action that you've taken, and what's the result? If the person can actually fill that circle of the STAR technique, then he's done it before, and chances are he can do it again. Let's see, what's the next question? Are we just gonna know? Okay. I want to explore how an interview behaves when provoked, upset, or angry. How to explore without provoking them. Absolutely. And again, it's not about provoking them during the interview. Because provoking them during the interview, chances are they're going to block you psychologically, don't want to deal with you. In fact, they might go into a fight with you, and that's the last thing that you want. If the job that the person is being interviewed for requires handling, for example, angry clients, tough situations, you name it, ask the candidate again if he has been in a situation like this before and how he has handled it. It's all about the past. Next question, how to check the suitability of an introvert. I think we've talked about that. Do you do personality tests during the interview, or better schedule outside the interview timing? Absolutely outside the interview timing. Even in assessment centers, you would have a specific time for the assessment center, and you have a separate time for the competency-based interviews. The ideal situation in my mind, if you have the person come do the testing on a day, let them go, rest, come back at another time and do the interview. If you do one thing after the other, it becomes a very tiring, and it's very pressuring for the candidate. I do understand though that sometimes these individuals are coming from abroad and you only have 2 days to do this. Well, then it's fine. But the preference is definitely if you avoid doing them on the same day. What about people that never had the experience that might be able to do that in the future? I don't know about that. I mean, I guess you're looking for a talent. You're looking for potential in this case. When you're talking about general behavioral competencies, the people in general have had experiences during college. I mean, for example, let's say you want to ask about teamwork. Any college student have had to work in a team before. If you want to talk about communication skills, presentation skills, all of these behavioral competencies, as they call them, people have been exposed to them, even if they are very young. The problem is, or the challenge is, when you have a certain technical competency and the person have never done it before, well, that means you have to spend the effort and the time developing that person. All you can do at that point in time is maybe check for the knowledge and see if they have the willingness and the desire to be in that field. But you don't have a guarantee 100% in a case like this. It happened to be, yes. Or at least has the innate talent to lead or handle a difficult situation. Yeah. Again, it's about asking about past behaviors. 100%. Rasha is asking, do you think is it fair to evaluate a person's future ability to succeed based on past actions? Absolutely. You know, I use a funny example in my courses, and I tell them, if I told you that last night before I went to bed I brushed my teeth, and the night before that, before I went to bed, I brushed my teeth, and the night before that I did the same. What do you expect is going to happen tonight and the night after that? Well, chances are I'm going to brush my teeth. So past behavior is always a good indicator of the future behavior, because if you've done something in the past, chances are it has turned into a habit. And human beings, 95% of what they do is based on habits and based on what they've done in the past. How else do we learn unless we make mistakes? 100%. Mistakes are a part of our growth as human beings. But if you've done it in the past, your chances of making the mistakes is a lot less than somebody who has not done it before. For entry-level positions, those without working experience, is competency-based interviews still applicable? Absolutely. Because remember, when you have a competency framework on your organization, you have two types of competencies. You've got the core competencies, or sometimes they call them the organizational competencies, and these are purely behavioral, you know, like teamwork, communication skills, leadership. These things you can test in situations outside the work environment, where a person can display that he has that competence even in outside the work situation, and that will tell you whether the person can repeat behaviors like this during the workplace. So you can focus on the behavioral, but maybe not the technical competence. My major concerns with BBIs is interviewees, transparency, and integrity. It's all about self-report. You're right. You know, the person has to be honest. But my feeling is that when you apply a STAR technique or competency or the other types of competency-based questions that we didn't talk about, unfortunately, because of the lack of time, you're probing a lot, and the person who does the probing is the expert. And when you probe, you know, notice the competency-based questions, like you've seen in the STAR technique, it's not about a single question, it's a series of questions. And the ability of a person to be able to lie from, like, you know, question 1 to question 10, that's, you know, that's a major undertaking. And that's why I made the joke about, if the person can lie and prove his case, you know, 10 questions in a row, you know, he's the kind of person you should hire. You know, you know, a professional liar. And I've in, you know, my 23 years of experience, I haven't come across a person who's got that ability to lie. On what level is your competency interview based? Behavioral assessment most of the time is misleading. Why do you say behavioral assessment is misleading? I kind of, you know, the whole point of this webinar, if you will, is about the fact that, on the contrary, behavioral assessment is not misleading at all. It's, if you ask about a situation completely with the STAR technique, you should actually pin down whether the person is, you know, is telling the truth or not. Nobody, as I said, can be able to lie straight through a line of questions like this. We don't ask the question for each competency. Thanks for the answer anyways. No, I didn't say that you have to ask 10 questions for each competency. But, you know, what I'm saying is you ask a series of questions for that competency. And people will have a hard time not telling the truth. And they have to be transparent if they want to impress you. Muhammad Umair Akram, I had an experience with an interviewee for the cashier's position. He was asked about the reason of leaving the previous job. He told that he was fired for embezzlement with money. What should be the approach in such a situation? Well, probe it. Why were you fired for embezzlement? What has happened? What did you embezzle? Or how much did you embezzle? How did it happen? Apply the STAR technique there. You know, find out as much information about that situation as possible. Chances are, when you know, maybe he was fired, unfairly. Who knows? Maybe he was accused unfairly. But he was gracious enough and transparent enough to say this. Get the full information. Remember, interviews are intended for you to collect information, as much information as possible about the candidate. Use it for that purpose. Sometimes candidates know the right answers expected. Yes, I mean, they're naturally. I mean, it's expected both ways. We do want them to come forth and be as transparent as possible. I guess the question that was raised earlier was, how can you guarantee their transparency? There is no guarantee. But what I'm saying is the chances of you getting a transparent answer, an honest and open answer using the competency-based approach is much, much higher. You prefer assessing character. Well, how do you judge character? I mean, in your personal life, you judge character based on the behaviors that you see from people. And that's what we're saying in competency-based interviews. Look for the behavior. Put yourself in the shoes of another person. Absolutely. There's nothing better than, you know, you practice empathy, 100%. 100%. So how do you, in the previous example, how do you establish that such things won't happen in the future? Just for probing, you can't. You can't. You're hoping for the learning. You're hoping to find out whether they've done it in the past or not. What have they learned from the past behaviors or the past experience? If they can prove to you that they've learned the lesson and they have applied and adopted new behaviors that prove to you they have actually learned the lesson, that's how you can guarantee in the future, or at least partially guarantee or mostly guarantee in the future that, you know, it cannot happen again. So yes, but absolutely, probe as much as you want. You know, the interview is yours. It's an open session. It's for you to get to know the candidate and for the candidate to get to know you. It looks like there are no more questions, and I think we're coming to the end. We just, you know, exceeded the time by 2 minutes. However, there is one more question that might coming. I'll take that one, and then we'll end the session. Oh, please, thank you very much for being here, and I want to thank everybody for their feedback and for their inputs. I hope you found the webinar beneficial. And I can't help but tell you, if you would like to learn more about this, please join us in our courses. You'll find a lot more. Professional interviewing skills has a lot more information about competency-based interviews. For 5 days we talk about this, and it gives you a lot more depth and insight. I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Meirc.com